Okay, hi everybody. Welcome to the Thoughtful Bro streaming live on A Mighty Blaze. As usual, we're here every Tuesday at 2 talking on A Thoughtful Bro about what makes great books tick, what makes great authors tick, and you're in for a mega treat today. This is like a personal favorite of mine, so not that I love all my interviews equally, but this one is special.
Gotta be careful to say that, yeah.
All right, so just a few things before we get started with the amazing Matt Ruff. So A Mighty Blaze, in case you don't know, we're a collective of authors who all got together at the beginning of COVID. And we wanted to help all of our friends and our friends of friends and friends of friends of friends who had their book tours canceled. And Matt actually totally falls into that category because his pub date for his latest work was in the spring. And so his book tour was decimated. And so anyway, we've been helping people all along. We've had amazing authors on. Recently, we've had John Irving, Erica Jong, Judy Bloom. Dean Koontz is coming on at 4 o'clock today, like in 2 hours. Dean Koontz will be on. So it's been an amazing ride, and we do feel like we've been able to help some other authors get, meet with readers, connect with readers in the absence of real life book tours. So that's what A Mighty Blaze is about. If you have any questions for Matt about 88 Names, his latest book, about the HBO show Lovecraft Country, anything you want, just put it in the comments below and I will, through my sources, hear about it and ask Matt about it. Next week, we have, we're gonna be really cool next week. We have Chris Haw and Jordan Blaszek. They've written a book called Union, and this is a full book name I'm gonna give to you. Union, a Democrat, a Republican, and a search for common ground. And I think that that is just going to be an amazing interview. I think it's actually just what we need right now, is just, people on both sides trying to find ways that we can all get along, because there's getting along is in really short supply these days. Also, last thing I'll say is that that's also part of our Blaze the Vote initiative. And we're trying to bring on more political guests kind of in the run up to the election, and just give people the idea that, the very true idea that your vote really counts. And, it's your way to express yourself in a democracy, and the only way to kind of get past all of this is for everybody to go out and vote. No matter who you're voting for, your vote matters, and that's our message. And if you want to buy any Blaze the Vote swag, you can look down in the in the comments. We just put together some hats and t-shirts and stuff in the last few days. Anyway, so that's it for my intro. Now on to Matt Ruff. So Matt Ruff, he was born in New York City, and he decided at the age of 5 that he wanted to be a fiction writer. When he was an undergrad at Cornell, he wrote his first novel called Fool on the Hill, and he published it 6 months after he graduated. He's been writing novels ever since. Matt's 6th novel, called Lovecraft Country, won a World Fantasy Award, and now, right now, is a critically acclaimed show on HBO. I think the 7th episode, it's a 10-episode first season, 7th episode went on Sunday, a couple of days ago.
Actually, it was the 8th.
The 8th, okay. So the 8th episode, but regardless, we are right in the middle of Lovecraft Country rolling out. It is I think it's at about 88% or in the high 80s on Rotten Tomatoes. This is a critically acclaimed show. Frankly, it's just unlike anything else out there. So that's an amazing thing for Matt, and it's an amazing thing for all of us who get to watch it. This spring, Matt released his 7th book, which is called 88 Names. It's about video gamer culture, Kim Jong-un. It's been, of course, it's been compared to Ready Player One. 2/3 of the book are set in virtual reality. Needless to say, it's a really cool book. To sum up, Matt, there's so many people, you go anywhere online and you will find people singing Matt's praises. But I just want to read to you a quote that I found on Goodreads, kind of in the Goodreads reviews of 88 Names. I thought this was sort of a humble and straightforward way to kind of sum things up. So this is what the reader wrote. Matt Ruff is an author I will always read. He's not prolific, and he doesn't have a formula. He's a great writer, he's funny, and he has lots of topics to tackle. I love that about him. You just never know what you're gonna get. And I just thought, it's not zing, zing, boom. You can find those quotes anywhere, but this is just one reader talking about kind of what makes you unique, and most importantly, what makes him want to read, or her, actually, I don't know if it's him or her, makes them want to read your every book. But anyway, Matt Ruff, welcome to the Thoughtful Bro.
Well, thank you for having me. Just one other correction I got to make really quickly.
Oh, yeah.
Lovecraft Country was actually only a finalist for the World Fantasy Award. Didn't win.
Okay. Got it. Still, high praise.
No, yeah, completely happy with the reception the book has gotten. I have no complaints. I just don't want to claim credit that I didn't earn. So,
okay, awesome. All right, well, look. So let's move on. I feel like I've been talking forever. You're gonna be the center of this from here on forward. So let's just start with 80. Just one last thing I want to say. We're going to talk about 88 Names and Lovecraft Country, and I hope you all stick around for the end of this discussion because Matt, a personal kind of issue that I love is just race and representation in publishing. It's a super, super hot issue. It's a super important issue right now in publishing. And obviously, if anybody knows the first thing about Lovecraft Country, you know that race and representation are sort of like at the center of that project. And they're also in a lot of other Matt's works too. So we're going to get to that more at the end. But for now, let's start with 88 Names, your most recent book. Just tell us what that book's about.
Okay, so the book is set, it doesn't really give a date, but it's set roughly 20 years in the future. And the protagonist is a guy named John Chu, and he's what's known as a Sherpa, which is a paid guide to online video games. And basically the way that would work is, say we were not, all locked indoors and you had a real life and, you wanted to play the futuristic equivalent of World of Warcraft, but you had a real life and you didn't have hundreds of hours with nothing better to do than play video games. So what you can do is you can pay this guy a fee and he will present you with a ready-made high-level character and a team of trained players to sort of come along with you and basically cater a night's adventure. And he gets a new client who goes by the pseudonym of Mr. Jones, who claims to be a wealthy, famous person with powerful enemies, and basically is offering him $100,000 a week for a comprehensive tour of the world of online VR gaming. It's one of those deals that sounds like it's too good to be true, but he's willing to pay the first week's salary up front, and the money is real. So John Chu takes the gig, but he's obviously curious. And as the job begins to unfold, he begins to suspect that Mr. Jones is actually Kim Jong-un, the North Korean dictator, who's apparently interested in VR for reasons that have nothing to do with entertainment. So it becomes this cat and mouse game between the two of them. And as you mentioned, the first 2/3 of the novel are set entirely in virtual reality, either in virtual chat rooms or in actual gaming environments. So everybody basically in the story has total control over how they look and sound. If someone tells you their name, you can look them up on social media, but social media can lie too. And so basically everyone that John Chu is interacting with is someone, not just Mr. Jones, but his coworkers and even his ex-girlfriend are people he's never met face to face. So basically it's this sort of cat and mouse game cyber thriller with a bit of twisted romantic comedy thrown in an environment where everyone is fundamentally a shapeshifter. And so that's the basic setup.
Oh my God. So it's so cool. And just so our readers know, like, I'm not a gamer, like this Sherpa thing, it's a real thing, right? Like this is a real business, right?
I don't know if it has happened yet, but I'm assuming it eventually will. I mean, the idea came from a real life phenomenon called gold farming, which is something I learned about, about 10, 15 years ago. It's basically a thing where people play video games and collect virtual goods and then sell them to other players for real money. And it started out with people accumulating gold pieces in role-playing games like EverQuest and World of Warcraft. And it's actually very controversial because players see this as a form of cheating, that people with money can sort of buy advancement in the game. And the game companies don't really like it either, because if somebody gets burned on a deal, they're tempted to call customer service and complain, and customer service has to explain, these guys don't work for us. We don't authorize them. We can't help you refund your money. Right. Sorry about that. So, and when I first read about that, I was just sort of fascinated and started thinking about, well, it would be interesting to do a story with a gold farmer as my protagonist. And then eventually I upgraded that to the idea of a sort of a full service Sherpa who would, operating in the black market, somebody who would be, that's part of what the title is about, is that these guys they're technically violating the terms of service. So once in a while they'll get caught and their accounts will get panned, but he's got multiple accounts. He's got 88 names, so he can just jump right back in. And as long as he's making enough money to cover the costs of new accounts, it works out. So yeah, it's a story about a struggling independent businessman who gets a deal that's too good to be true, and what comes of that.
Which is sort of a classic kind of tale in its way. But I mean, it's crazy. I mean, I don't know why I just assumed that it was a real thing, but it just sounds like it ought to be, or like will be very soon. It sounds like there would absolutely be a market for that kind of thing.
I'm sure someone has done this. I just don't know that it's become a trend yet. But
right.
But I mean,
So-
yeah, William Gibson's The Peripheral has a thing about this where poor people are playing games for rich people and basically doing this. So that was sort of, I remember reading about that. And because when I first came up with the idea for the Sherpa, I was worried it was a little too out there. And then I saw Bill Gibson did a variation on it. And I'm like, oh, okay, maybe this does make sense. So.
So I think I've heard in other interviews that like this particular project kind of like was a long time in the gestation, and also maybe that it was like part of a it was like originally maybe going to be a TV show, or I don't know if that was just Mirage and Lovecraft Country, but
no,
I just,
it was it was back in end of 2006 2007. I had a meeting with some TV people who were fans of my fourth novel, Bad Monkeys, and they invited me to pitch them ideas for original TV series, and I ended up pitching them The Mirage, Lovecraft Country, and 88 Names was my last attempt. And they didn't go for any of them, but I was just fell in love with these story ideas and decided to try to make them work as novels. So I started with The Mirage and then did Lovecraft Country. And then as Lovecraft Country was published and as the TV series was advancing, it was like, what am I going to do next? And I thought, well, why don't I complete the triptych? This has been working out pretty well so far. So I decided to give 88 Names a try. And I wrote the first 3 chapters of it and showed it to my wife, who is not a video gamer. Just that was sort of my test. And, and she was like, yeah, you got to do this. This is really good. And so then I sent it to my agent, who is definitely not a video gamer. And she said, yes, this is very good. You've got to do this. So that was sort of how it got started. And the book is very much written so that you obviously, if you are a video gamer, you will eat this up. But even if you aren't, it explains what you need to know. And it's really as much about the relationships and the difficulty of having interpersonal relationships, again, in an environment where nobody is necessarily what they appear to be. So it's got plenty for everybody, I hope.
Oh, for sure. It's funny. I want to talk to you in a minute about like part of your book tour for this, which like I have seen you like disguised virtually as part of your book tour. I mean, like, didn't you like appear as like a kind of animal on a virtual book tour?
Yeah, that was the Drax Radio Files hour.
Okay.
He's a German interviewer based in Munich, and he's active on both Second Life and Sansar, which is the VR equivalent of Second Life. And it was basically an interview where I'm wearing the Oculus headset, and I was appearing as a talking mandrill in a jean jacket. So sort of my Bad Monkeys persona. That was a lot of fun. And if you watch the interview, it's on YouTube. You can find links for it on my website. And I'm seeing the whole thing. It's in first person for me, that was the first time I had done something like that. And it was fascinating because, first of all, I'm having a conversation with someone who's on another continent. I don't have to travel thousands of miles to be there. And then because it's virtual, he was able to dress the set with, virtual copies of all my books, so we could throw those around the room. And it was just a fascinating look at, and this was, now that COVID has happened, this was, I think we recorded that actually before the lockdown started, but now it's just making me think that this is a really useful medium. I mean, even after we were allowed to leave our houses again, just the idea of being able to throw together that kind of, group gathering without having to travel. You could just, with a couple of hours notice, just long enough to let people know that it's going to happen. That just seems like a really neat use of technology. So and very topical. Cool. Yeah. And well, that was part of the thing writing this novel. Part of it was I wanted to get back some of the time I have wasted playing video games in my life, but also part of it was I thought it might get me introduced to or get opportunities like that, because if you write about VR, then people who do VR will hear about you and invite you to play with their toys. So that's been one of the nice perks of this.
All right, so I want to go back though to this. I mean, you have to admit, Matt, that this is like kind of an amazing story. This idea that in 15 years ago, you pitched 3 TV shows that were all rejected. One of them went on to be the smash hit that it is now, and then the other 3 were successful novels. I mean, it's just sort of an interesting story. And just the question I want to ask, I can see you want to talk, but just like the question.
No, go ahead.
Yeah. So the question that I just wanted to ask about it was like, I am just interested. So there's like 3 different kinds of storytelling that are like part of this story. One is TV storytelling. Mm-hmm. One is novel storytelling. And then the third, which kind of just applies to 88 Games more, is video game storytelling. Now, video gaming is, I think, like I looked up some numbers online that it's like $150 billion global industry, and you know, the global box office for Hollywood movies is like 40 billion. So video gaming dwarfs movie storytelling. And I just think, I find it personally really interesting, even though I'm not a gamer. I find that kind of like the way that you are just kind of motivated and the way those stories are structured, you always have to be getting something. Usually the stakes are extremely high, usually they're life or death. And so it's just a really interesting and different and complex kind of storytelling. But I guess to put it in a nutshell, like what is my question? I mean, just going back to how you originally pitched this, like what do you think about the different storytelling styles, TV, video game, novel?
I mean, the biggest distinction is that, of course, novels are the inexpensive version. Anybody, like, novels are one of the last art forms where you can be a solo practitioner. You do this at home, and even a publishing house publication, I mean, they can do it for probably less than 100,000 with a big print market. So that means, I mean, the more money that is attached to a project, the more conservative the people paying for it are going to be, which is why you can do things in novels that TV producers would kind of balk at. And so there's always going to be a role for novel writing. And I'm fortunate being able to do that, because I do have these weird ideas that tend to scare people with money. So this gives me a way to tell the story in one version and say, no, see, this is what it looks like when it's complete. This is what I have in mind. I may not have described it properly, but now you can read it and you can see where I was going to go with it. TV, yeah, it's like, yeah, TV. I guess with certain productions like HBO, for a full season, you're spending as much as you would on a major motion picture. But in general, TV is obviously more expensive than books by a significant margin, but still cheaper than a typical big budget film. And then, yeah, and then you've got video games, which are way up there. But there, I feel like the narrative structure is similar, I think, in TV and books, in that you are telling a story to someone who's sitting and watching. I don't want to say passively, because I always feel there's an active imagination going on. I never feel very passive when I'm watching television, but that is that you're not making choices as to what's going to happen. You're seeing what's going to happen. And obviously, because it's a visual medium, there's a different dialect and a different way you tell the same scenes and stuff. And it's been an interesting learning experience for me, watching the adaptation of Lovecraft Country, just seeing how they convey stuff visually that I would convey with long prose. But then with video games, you have this weird problem that I generally find the storytelling methods very clunky, because often what they'll do, like particularly in video games, you'll get this stuff where you'll actually have text that you've got to read, or worse, you're expected to sit still and listen to somebody talk in a video. And it's almost a different thing, because the gaming, it's interactive. You want to be doing stuff, and anything that makes you stop and stare at the screen can be very annoying. I'm one of those impatient people who's always trying to hit escape and break through the cutscenes, because I don't, unless the storytelling's very good, which sometimes it is, but a lot of the times they just kind of skimp on that anyway. So but it is very difficult to tell an engaging story and weave it into play in a way that doesn't stop things dead. And so that's actually it's a talent that requires multiple disciplines. And so it's not surprising that it's rare that there are people who do it well. I mean, I think my favorite examples are probably, Half-Life and Portal did a really good job of telling stories in a way that doesn't slow you down. It's just the environment sort of tells you what you need to know. And that's very hard to do.
Have you ever been approached to write video game?
I did a brief tryout stint as a script doctor on a major video game some years back. This would have been 10, 15 years ago now. And I did not get chosen. They liked my work, but I think I was second place in the people they were looking to hire. But it was really interesting, because one of the things I learned was it's much easier to rewrite other people's stuff than it is. I'm much more of a perfectionist when it comes to my own work, and I'm always just being very meticulous. But the pressure of having a deadline, you've got to turn this around really quickly. And then the fact is, I'm just not as invested because it's somebody else's structure. It was very easy to like, well, here's an idea and here's an idea, and if you don't like it, that's fine. We'll try something else. So that could have been an interesting alternate career for me if I had not ended up doing what I'm doing. But that was sort of fun. Yeah.
Well, two comments about that. So number one is like, that's like so instructive to me just as a writer. And I honestly try to do that all the time. Just try to like, when I come back to a draft after like taking a break, I'm like, try to pretend this is someone else's book, just so you can slash away. But the other thing I was going to make is, the point I was going to make is that I think people should really think twice about rejecting your work now, right? Because we saw what happened with Lovecraft Country when they said no.
Well, but that's the thing, is that a lot of this too is like, I mean, part of the reason the show is as good as it is because it's got HBO and HBO's talent and money behind it. I mean, if this had been done on another network, or if it had been done on, God help me, on broadcast TV, where your rules are very different. You've got commercial breaks, which changes the flow of everything. And I don't know if they'd gotten away from are they still doing the 22, 23 episode a year thing on broadcast TV or not? I don't know, but I know in cable, they've gone to like 13 episodes as the standard. But I just remember, when the shows would have to do 22-hour-long episodes per year, which is just, in hindsight, the amount of work that you'd have to put in to get that done. And then there's just never enough story to spread out that far. So, they may have been perfectly right to reject it for what they were looking at the time. And again, this was 13 years ago now, so it would have been, and it's an expensive show. It's a period piece. It is a sci-fi fantasy thing. So there's lots of CGI. And again, the CGI was not that great 13 years ago necessarily. And then there was the fact that, it was an all black cast, or a largely black cast. I didn't do any of the things that you can sort of do to make that more palatable to conservative. Again, the more conservative mindset of, I didn't give Atticus a white friend, to sort of, because I just was like, if you're going to tell a story about the horrors of racism, you really want to stay focused on the people for whom it is a horror. And I didn't, it was just like, if you can't identify with these characters for who they are, then you're not going to like the show anyway. If you need to have that sort of white sidekick as the entry point. So, but from their perspective, this just must have sounded like kind of radical and kind of out there. And then I may not have been the best pitchman for it anyway. So I don't, I'm glad that they gave me the opportunity to come up with these ideas. Then that I'll always be grateful to them for that sort of that writing prompt, which they gave me, which they didn't realize they were giving me, that I've been eating off of very happily for the past 13 years. So now it's going to be time to reorder, because I've used up the 3 ideas. So I'll have to go have coffee again with somebody, but.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, I know we're going into Lovecraft Country maybe ahead of schedule here, but like, it's amazing how times have changed. You know what I mean? I mean, like, it seems like, you bring up some of the issues about CGI, for example, about why maybe they might have rejected it. But like, as far as like a country that's trying to understand race and find ways to talk about race, boy, you couldn't have timed a release like this better than summer of 2020.
I know it seems that way, but that's another instance where I feel like, if you think about it, I mean, there's always something. It's like that it's not like this stuff goes away. It's just periodically there's a higher profile incident of somebody getting killed by the cops or something like that. But I am old enough to remember the Rodney King beating back in the 90s. It's like this stuff is not new. It's just that it goes in and out of the attention span of the media, basically. And granted, this is a very unusual year between the election and everything else that's going on. 2020 just seems cursed in so many ways. So, and the fact that, yes, people are stuck indoors and they're, just at a time when you can't create a lot of new entertainment. So the entertainment choices are more limited, but I really feel like you could have released this show anytime in the last 20, 30 years, or even further back, and it would have felt very topical. So although I'll grant you 2020 is hard to beat in terms of just complete over the top craziness, but
so I mean, so for those who don't know, can you just talk about what Lovecraft Country is about, like what inspired you to write it, and just give us like the nutshell on that?
Sure. So the elevator pitch for this was that it was going to be the X-Files if Mulder and Scully were black travel writers living in the 1950s. It's basically a black family. They live in Chicago in 1954 in the novel. It's been changed to 55 in this TV series. And they run a travel agency and publish a a fictional version of the Green Book called the Safe Negro Travel Guide, which is basically a guidebook that lists hotels and restaurants and other accommodations across the country that accept Black customers, which many did not back then because segregation was legal. And again, contrary to what a lot of people seem to think, that this was not an issue restricted to the South. And in many ways, the South was actually easier to deal with because the South was very upfront about being segregated. So there were extensive signs everywhere telling you where you were and weren't welcome. Where Black travelers actually would run into more trouble was traveling in the North and the West, where they were just as likely to be denied service, but didn't necessarily have extensive signage warning of that. That's where you really needed a guidebook to tell you, so you didn't waste your time stopping at like, a dozen different hotels and motels being told, oh gosh, we just forgot to put on the no vacancy sign. So yeah, it's about this. The son of the family is named Atticus Turner. He's a Korean war vet, just got back from fighting overseas. And he and his uncle George, who runs the travel agency, they're both nerds. They're both big fans of genre fiction, even though, just like everything else, genre fiction did not love Black people back in those days. And so the story is about them and the family getting drawn into a series of real life weird tales of the kind that, would not have had Black protagonists at that time. And then at the same time dealing with the day-to-day horrors of life in the Jim Crow era. And so and this is where the title comes in, because I basically needed a way to encompass both paranormal horror and the more mundane horrors of racism. And so I thought, well, H.P. Lovecraft is perfect for that. He's, this very influential, very talented horror writer, but he was also an avid white supremacist. So Lovecraft Country is a double entendre for the paranormal landscape, where one kind of monster comes from, and white America, where another kind of monster comes from. And the big question is, which one is the bigger threat to safety and sanity? And it's not really a hard question to answer, but that's sort of the driving engine behind the novel.
Oh my God! I mean, just the concept and the premise and the inspiration for the show are just so friggin' awesome. I just loved everything you just said. But look, so one thing I want to talk about, and this is just so important for what's going on right now in publishing. There's been a few kind of small to large size scandals in the last year about author representation. For example, you have a white person who is writing about a main character from a different culture who has a different skin color than them. And there have been a lot of issues around, do you have the right to tell that story? What do you need to do to tell that story well and make it so you are embraced by that culture and you're building a bridge rather than burning one? And I think just one thing I wanted to throw in, I think I heard that, is it right that the Pam Knowles essay Shame was something that you had read? I think I read that in a review, that there was that essay that maybe you were aware of.
Yeah, Pam Knowles, I think she published this in 2006, and it's basically an essay talking about her. She's a sort of one of the quintessential Black nerds, and she's just writing about her fraught relationship with the genre. And she talks about as a young girl, she would, I think she was living in Philadelphia or Pittsburgh, somewhere in Pennsylvania, I believe. And anyway, used to watch the sort of weekend. They would run old science fiction shows at night, and her dad would watch with her, and he would tease her for loving these white genres. And it would be the kind of thing where you're a kid and your parents are making fun of stuff that you love, and you're responding like, "Dad, just leave me alone, let me enjoy my stuff." Anyway, the moment where she sort of realized what her dad was trying to tell her is that she went to see Star Wars, which for her, like for every other kid of that era, was this religious experience. But at the same time, as she's watching, she's realizing, oh, there aren't any, there's the one Black X-wing pilot who his only line is to scream as his ship gets blown up. Right. And basically, so it's it kind of broke her heart. She finally realized what her parents had been trying to sort of communicate to her, and she came home in tears. And just reading that story just kind of brought home to me in a way that I had not fully appreciated before. I mean, I'd this complaint that minorities are not properly represented in genre fiction is something I'd been hearing long before that. But there was just something about that, because it touched on that experience of watching watching Star Wars for the first time that really sort of connected with me. So that was, yeah, that was one of the things, is like, I wanted to capture that experience in this novel as well.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, as far as the idea of restricting, I've always, I mean, I grew up in a multicultural family. My dad was from the Midwest. My mom was a missionary's daughter, so she's born in Brazil and raised in Argentina. And our house in Queens was sort of Ellis Island for all the South American relatives coming up. So I grew up surrounded by very opinionated people who did not see things the way, I did. They had very different worldviews. And so it just very early on, I had this, thought that part of what fiction is for is to sort of help me understand life in a world where there are people from different backgrounds who, they may be very similar to me in some ways, similar temperaments, similar interests, but just completely different ways of looking at the world in other senses. And so that's always been, to me, one of the, my books are all over the map in terms of subject matter, but the two most persistent themes are culture clashes, where I'll take people from different backgrounds and sort of force them into a situation where they have to find a way to get along with each other. They can't, none of those easy outs where, one of them is converted to the other's belief system at the end. It's like, no, what if you go on just believing something that's different from the other person all the way it happens in real life? And then the other thing is just trying to get inside the heads of folks who are different from me. So, and this, this particular subject, obviously, white author writing from a Black perspective is super extra double fraught right now. But to me, it's just a natural extension of the kind of thing I've always done in my writing. And so the idea of refraining from it just seems silly to me. It's the way you do this is, first of all, you just accept the fact that you are probably going to be playing to a tough crowd, at least initially, and you've got to win them over. And the way to do that is just don't get lazy, do your research. Don't shortcut and reach for stereotypes, and you'll be fine, I think. And I've had a lot of practice in writing from other points of view. So to me, yeah, it was a natural thing to do. I was aware, obviously, that if I screwed it up, or if I did get lazy, I would hear about it, but that was not a reason not to do it. That was just an inspiration to make sure I did well. So.
Oh, words to live by, man. Awesome. I mean, I just love your whole perspective on this. And, I think I heard you just say in an interview once, like, what actually you like doing is writing about people who are different from you. Like, it's like the fact that they're this different from you in cases, particularly in the case of race, but there's other reasons why your characters are different from you. But like, that is like sort of the very reason why you're doing it. That's like what makes it interesting to you, right?
Well, and I mean, that's the thing is, I think there are two issues here. One is that, the big stumbling block, I think, for a lot of white authors, it's not knowledge, it's not even talent, it's just desire. You've got to really want to do this. And yes. I think this is part of the problem, is that a lot of folks, if you ask them and you could get an honest answer, they would say they just want to write about people who are like them. And, 20, 30 years ago, you could just say that, yeah, I like writing stories about white men. Why would I want to write about anybody else? And, now the message has penetrated that if you say that, people will get mad at you. But the problem is people still feel that way. And diversity, diversity is like this chore that they've got to take care of before they can get back to doing what they really want to do. And if that's how you see it, if you approach the writing as a chore, then it's going to read like one, and you're going to go for shortcuts and you're going to half-ass it. And that's where people do sort of lazy stereotyped writing that gets a bad rap. And that's the biggest thing, I think, is just getting past that. And then too, I just think there is this needless sense of fear where people just get really defensive, like they assume ahead of time that they're going to be attacked for stuff, and that I think if you need to be careful about people with, like, if you write in your afterward, I feel so bad that I'm a white person writing about the subject I shouldn't be writing about. Well, if you're foolish enough to say something like that in public, then yes, you're going to attract very critical readers, and then they're going to find something that you've done wrong. And I just think that's the wrong way to approach it. You should just for me, it's just, I really enjoyed doing this, and I thought I could do a good job. And I've again, it's not my first time writing a subject that if I didn't do the job well, I thought it would be embarrassing, but that's just a go to do a good job and not get lazy. And I've generally found that when I'm contemplating a project and I find myself getting a little bit nervous, where I'm saying to myself, if I don't do this right, it's going to be, horribly embarrassing. That's a good sign, not a bad one. That means that the upside to that is if I pull it off, it'll probably be pretty good. So, yeah. And again, I'm unusual in that way, whereas I think a lot of other people, if they start feeling nervous, that's a reason to write a different book. And,
Yep. So there's a few questions that are coming in from the audience, but before we get to those, just want to say a few other things. So I would just say that, like, personally, the thing that most struck me of what you just said, and I loved all of it, was this idea that you gotta have the desire, and I think I've never quite heard it said like that before, but like you've got to really want it. You've got to want to get this right, and you sort of like can't put that hunger in people where it doesn't naturally occur. And right. I think like you're right that like where people go wrong is they feel that they have to do it, and like readers can just smell that right away. But I mean, for you and like in my own work and in the work of people I've talked to who get it right, there's just this deep kind of abiding passion to get it right, and that's sort of why it ends up right.
Well, and it also just makes it easy to ignore people who are going to try and talk you out of it. It's like, yeah, I understand why you might be hesitant to do this yourself, or why you're worried for me, but I'll be fine. I want to do this. I want to get it right, and I'll figure out a way to get it right. And the other thing too is if again, I've been writing professionally for 33 years now, so I know. I'm confident enough to know when a book is not working, that I can figure that out before anybody else has to see it. And so if I had felt like, a third of the way through Lovecraft Country, this is just not going well, I would have said, okay, then obviously this is not the book for me. But it wasn't like that. I loved sitting down every day with these characters and getting to know them better. So that's the key.
Right. So one question from the audience that we have, it sort of dovetails with a question that I wanted to ask. The question is, what do hardcore fans of Lovecraft think of Lovecraft Country? And so I want to get your answer to that. But sort of like, I we just want to preface that a little bit with like something I just kind of wanted to hear you talk about, which was like, you brought up that Lovecraft himself was a white supremacist. You don't have to click many times on the internet to find some really virulently racist stuff of his out there. And it's interesting. I'll just tell you one quick story. So I went to Brown University, and I lived on a street my senior year called Barnes Street. The address was, I think, 71 Barnes Street. And I found out prior to going to my most recent reunion that Lovecraft, I was like reading about Lovecraft randomly, and I found out that he lived on Barnes Street in Rhode Island, in Providence. And so I thought, and the address was 10 Barnes Street, at least according to Wikipedia. And so I went there, I was like, oh my God, there's going to be a plaque there. And this whole time I had lived like 100 yards from where Lovecraft, and it was like where he wrote his most famous works, on the street called Barnes Street. And if you go there in Providence, there's nothing there. There's no plaque, nothing. And I just thought to myself, at that time, I thought, I wonder why that is. And I don't know why there isn't, but I would bet that especially on the campus of Brown University, and hopefully everywhere else in America, but like the idea that you'd put a plaque there would be extremely controversial given some of his views. So anyway, there's me setting you up to talk about like Lovecraft as the racist and how like that might have impacted your desire to write this. And then we also have a question from the audience about how have hardcore Lovecraft fans taken it?
It's funny. It's possible they just didn't put a plaque there because even now he's not, he's famous. He's famous within the genre, but he's still, he's one of those guys. He became famous after his death for the most part. He was not well known during his lifetime. So it's possible they just didn't bother to put a plaque up for him for that reason. The thing about it, it's funny that the stuff that everybody sort of gravitates toward now is that he used racial epithets quite a lot, but frankly, so did everybody else back then. I think that where you really get into it is he just had this very detailed view about that Anglo-Saxon civilization was like the height of human evolution, and it was this really weird belief system though, that it was kind of like almost like the Viking belief in Ragnarok, that he believed that yes, that white civilization was the pinnacle now, but that inevitably it would go into decline and fall and be replaced by some other civilization, maybe the Chinese, maybe the Japanese. And, then they would have their moment in the sun, and then their civilization would fall too, and so on until the earth died off and the universe went on its uncaring way without us. So, but when you get into him, it's just like, yeah, because he did not believe in democracy, because he didn't believe that, everybody should have the right to vote. That was ridiculous. He was, he believed in very much the elites. And it was very ironic, though, that, this is a guy who's talking about Vikings and blonde, blue-eyed Anglo-Saxons as like the pinnacle of evolution. But he himself, he had brown eyes and dark hair, and he would joke that he was Roman. That was his Roman blood. But you could tell that was an issue for him, that he was very concerned about this, that both of his parents had died in an insane asylum. So I think a lot of his feelings about, a lot of his personal beliefs drew from this idea that his own blood might be contaminated in some way. And it's always those people who are sort of on the fringes of acceptability, or the biggest enforcers of racial, racial supremacy and those ideas. He was not comfortable in his own skin. So, but anyway, as far as the Lovecraft fans, it really varies. I mean, I think a lot of them are fine with it. There's a contingent who are just not happy that Lovecraft has become sort of this poster boy for racism in old style fandom, that people are constantly bringing up the fact that this is what he believed. And they just feel like, can't you, some of them still don't want to acknowledge that he was as racist as he was. Others, will acknowledge it, but they would like people to stop talking about it and go back to, and there are people too, I think, who feel that that the title is misleading, because the book is not really about Lovecraft. It's about this Black family. And that's the thing. I was not trying really to stick a finger in Lovecraft's eye. Again, it's just sort of, he was a convenient thematic bridge between these two types of horror. And then also, he's a perfect icon for the challenge that Black genre fans face, particularly Black horror fans face. And that there's this guy who's, there's stuff in his fiction that Victor LaValle is another writer who has written a book called The Ballad of Black Tom, came out the same day as Lovecraft Country, actually, that does a lot of the same stuff. And Victor has written about his love-hate relationship with Lovecraft, where he loves a lot of the fiction, but he just, obviously Lovecraft would not have regarded him as fully human. So that's just a tough thing to get past. So that was really what I was trying to do in the novel with Lovecraft. Is he's in there mainly just to dramatize these few ideas. If I had really wanted to engage more extensively with the man and his work and his racism, I think I would have written a different book entirely and tried to bring Lovecraft himself into it as a character. And that could be a really good book, but that wasn't this one. So I think that's the main thing, is that there are, again, there are plenty of Lovecraft fans who are fine with it. They get what I was doing. But there is a handful who are unhappy. They just feel like, well, you're using his name and besmirching his reputation for no good purpose. And it's like,
I think the purpose is quite good. but as you say, you're not intentionally besmirching it, or that wasn't your main goal. I mean, I don't know. I'm not going to go on a whole thing about Lovecraft Country, but a friend of mine once said that, a great book is born when two big ideas an author has smashed together. And I just think, like, this is like exhibit A in two major ideas smashing together to form something totally unexpected and generative and cool. So anyway, you have my vote. Look, so we're almost running out of time. We started a little bit late, so we went a little bit over, but just a couple of the questions. There's several questions came in from the audience that are sort of like around the same theme, which are about kind of like, what do you think of the show? And so I think that you said something in a different interview also that I really liked, that you said, and I imagine, like, if my own dreams ever came true and I had a show made of one of my books, I would think this is sort of the attitude that I might have too, which is that you said, I had my shot at telling the story. Like, I told it my way once, and now it's time for somebody else. And you're sort of like, you were excited. You, like, far from like wanting to control it or deeply influence the process, you're just like, let's see what they do when it's their turn to tell this story. So anyway, with that as sort of a setup, I'm just kind of curious, how did the show come out in your view?
I've been really happy with it so far. And yeah, as you say, I mean, this is something that you really have to go through the process before you know what you really believe. I mean, I've always said that, that yes, of course, I've got my, my book is on the shelf behind me. It'll always be there. And, it's until you've seen it happen. And again, I've been fortunate in that this is such a great adaptation. I still have yet to face that test of where somebody makes a terrible adaptation of your book. How do you take it then? But Although the hardest part about that would just be keeping your mouth shut and not saying what you really thought. But no, but in this case, I mean, I knew it was going to be good because Misha Green, the showrunner, did Underground, which, you know, it's basically the Great Escape set on a slave plantation. So I had seen her work previously, and I was very excited to have her working on this. And yeah, I was not going to move to LA and be in the writer's room, and, you know, and so it would have been ridiculous for me to try to second guess what, and I knew Misha was going to have her own ideas about where she wanted to go with this. So basically we had an exchange at the beginning of the process where I gave her a list of, you know, my research materials, and then I wrote out some notes about the way magic worked in the book and why I made the choices I made, and a couple of other things like that. And I had, you know, these genealogies and just how the characters related. And I gave her all that and basically just said, you know, take what you want out of this and lose the rest and see where you go with it. And I trust you. And that has proven to be a good choice on my part, because I've been very happy with what they've done. I feel it's very faithful in spirit to the novel while not being afraid to do, you know, a bunch of things very differently. So yeah, so I've been having a great time, and it's been kind of fun watching the reactions on Twitter, both the positive and the negative. It's just, again, a big learning experience, seeing what people twig on and so forth. But in general, I'm just really pleased.
All right, and one more question from the audience before we wrap, and I have one last question for you for myself. What is next for you? You've run out your triptych or your trilogy with that came from the TV pitch. Now what?
I mean, the main thing, you know, even though I'm not a sequel guy, I've been thinking about doing more with Lovecraft Country, and the issue has been, as I've said for the last 2 years in answering this question, is the problem is that if I open the story up again at this point, then I would want to carry it forward to a natural conclusion, which would probably mean, you know, carry the story forward probably until the 1960s. And which means I would probably want to do at least 2 and possibly 3 more books. And given that I am just such a slow writer, you know, it's like, yeah, but I just turned 55 and I'm like, okay, so what are we talking about? Am I going to be 65 by the time this is done? You know? So if I can, but the problem is I just keep thinking about it anyway. So that's probably a sign I've at least got to take a good run at it, so that if I don't do it, at least I don't wake up at 65 and think, oh, what if I had done that when I had the chance? So that's going to be my next project, is to see if I can make that work. And, you know, ask me again in a year, and by then I will know where I'm going with this. But that'll be my next project to try. And then, awesome. Yeah.
Exciting. All right, cool. Well, look, so last question from me. I always ask this to writers, and we're going to do a little bit differently this time. So you've got 2 books, your last 2 books, 88 Names and Lovecraft Country. They're behind you. By the way, can you just like hold them up just in case anybody wants to make 2 impulse buys right now?
I'm sorry, there's 88 Names. And then Lovecraft Country, you've got 2 choices of cover.
Whoa.
Yeah, we've got.
I love the covers, man. They're so cool.
The artist on Jared Taylor, who did the original art, I got to say, I love his work. So he also did the 88 Names jacket. So
it really captures the tone, I think, a great deal, which I think is the magic and a great cover. But so the question I always like to ask at the end is, like, usually I'm only talking about one book, and I say to the author, like, imagine you had an ideal reader who had basically like everything you're trying to do, they're getting, like every trick in your bag that you pull out, it works on them. And then I like to ask the author, like, so when they close that book and walk away from it, what is the feeling that they have? Like, what is the kind, if you could kind of summarize it in a word or 2, what are you leaving them with? And so maybe you could do that for both of these books.
Oh, wow. Well, actually, it would be the same answer for both, because me, I'm never really, I'm not a message guy. I am just that. I mean, my ideal audience is really me, and the feeling that gets me up every day is that moment in the writing a book when I've got it. You know, I may not be done yet, but I know that it works, and that I am going to, you know, I'm the text is down. I've still got editing to do, but there's this one glorious moment when I realize, yeah, that this is working the way I want it, and I am, you know, that it was worth the trouble I put into it, and it's going to be, you know, that feeling of satisfaction at a story well told. And I think I feel that way about other writers' works too. When there are certain works that just really speak to you, and you're just like, when you're done with it, it's like, that was really good. And that's the kind of feeling I like to leave people with. So
Yeah, just that satisfaction, like he closed, like he set it up, he did his job, he closed it out.
This really worked, and that was fun.
Mm.
And that's what, it's not like, let me, again, you different people will get different things out of it. There'll be things you'll be thinking about, there'll be ideas, but the main thing is just that general sense of, this moved me and it worked. And that's what I like to, leave people with.
Awesome. All right, so we have to wrap. Matt, thank you so much. This has been a real honor and a pleasure for me. You're a great, you do really well in these interviews. So you're always so candid. I love it. So thank you.
Well, thank you. It's been really a pleasure.
Awesome. All right, folks. So that's it for the Thoughtful Bro this week. We'll be back next week on Tuesday at 2. Again, we'll be with Chris Haw and Jordan Blaszek. Their book is called Union, A Democrat, a Republican, and the Search for Common Ground. We'll see you all then. Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye. We're waiting.